Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about one of the most feared mafia bosses in modern history, Salvatore Totò Riina. To some, he was known as Toto. To others, he was called the Beast. And in the world of the Sicilian Mafia, he became known as the man who helped turn Cosa Nostra from a shadowy criminal brotherhood into an organization willing to declare war on the Italian state itself.
I won't run from the storm. I arrive after it.
Now, this is not the story of a flashy gangster in a suit sitting in a nightclub, smiling for the cameras. Salvatore Riina was different. He was short, quiet, secretive, and incredibly violent. He came from the poverty, rose through murder, ruled through fear, and left behind a trail of blood that changed Italy forever. Salvatore Riina was born November 16th, 1930, in Corleone, Sicily. Today, when people hear the name Corleone, many think of The Godfather. But the real Corleone was not just a movie name, it was a real town with a long and dark connection to organized crime. Riina grew up in a poor rural world where survival was difficult and violence was never far away. His childhood was shaped by hardship, and Sicily at the time was still recovering from poverty, war, and deep social divisions. In many areas, the mafia operated as a hidden power structure, settling disputes, controlling land, intimidating enemies, and building loyalty through fear. Rina's early life also included tragedy. As a young man, he lost family members in an accident involving unexploded wartime ammunition. That kind of violence and instability surrounded his youth. But when Riina became later was not simply a product of poverty. Many people were poor. Not everybody became a killer. Riina chose the mafia, and once he entered that world, he embraced its most brutal side. By his late teens and early 20s, Riina was already involved in violent crime. He became connected to the mafia clan in Corleone, especially under the influence of Luciano Leggio, also spelled Liggio, one of the major Corleone leaders. Leggio was ruthless, ambitious, and determined to challenge the old mafia families in Palermo. Riina learned from him. He learned that power did not have to be negotiated, it could be taken. The Corleonesi were not the polished urban mafia families of Palermo. They were outsiders in some ways, rural, underestimated, and extremely dangerous. While older mafia bosses worked through tradition, influence, and political connections, the Corleonesi were willing to use overwhelming violence to climb the ladder. Riina became one of Luciano Leggio's most trusted men. Alongside other figures like Bernardo Provenzano, he helped transform the Corleone faction into one of the most feared forces in Sicily. One of Riina's early nicknames was Ukotu, meaning the short one, because of his height. But however, over time, another nickname followed him, La Belva, the Beast. The name became part of his reputation because of his violence, and it was not given lightly. Riina was not just accused of killing enemies, he was accused of ordering the deaths of rivals, judges, police officers, informants, politicians, and even family members of those who crossed him. In the mafia world, violence was always part of business, but on Riina, violence became a strategy of domination. By the late 1960s, Riina was already a fugitive. In 1969, he went into hiding, beginning a life on the run that would last more than 2 decades. But being a fugitive did not make him weak. In fact, during those years, his power grew stronger. This is one of the strangest parts of Rina's story. While Italian police searched for him, Rina was still operating. He was hiding in plain sight, protected by mafia loyalty, fear, corruption, and silence. He continued to meet, issue orders, and build influence. The mafia's code of silence, known as omerta, protected men like Riina. People did not talk. Witnesses disappeared. Informants were murdered. Families were threatened. And in Sicily, many people believed that speaking against the mafia was the same as signing your own death sentence. During the 1970s and early 80s, Riina and the Corleonesi began pushing towards total control of Cosa Nostra. This led to one of the bloodiest periods in mafia history, the Second Mafia War. This was not a war between police and criminals. This was mafia against mafia. The Corleonesi targeted rival bosses, soldiers, associates, and anyone suspected of disloyalty. Old Palermo mafia families were wiped out. Men vanished. Bodies appeared in streets, fields, and cars. Some were never found at all. This was the era of the Lupara Bianca, the white shotgun, meaning a murder where the body disappeared completely. And Riina's strategy was simple: eliminate every rival and terrify everyone else. By the end of the Second Mafia War, Riina had effectively become the most powerful boss in Cosa Nostra. He was often called the boss of bosses. Though mafia leadership was more complicated than one man officially ruling everything, still, there was no question. Riina had become the dominant force. He did not win by diplomacy. He won through assassination. And once he had power, he did not stop. Riina's mafia was involved in extortion, murder, political corruption, and international drug trafficking. Sicily had become a major point in the heroin trade, and Cosa Nostra made enormous money. But Riina's real obsession was control. Money mattered, but obedience mattered more. He demanded loyalty. He punished betrayal, and he believed fear was the only language people truly understood. But while Riina was building his empire, a new kind of enemy was riding inside the Italian justice system. Two names will become forever connected to his downfall: Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Falcone and Borsellino were anti-mafia magistrates from Palermo. They understood Cosa Nostra in a way few officials had before. They recognized that the mafia was not just a collection of random criminals. It was a structured organization with rules, hierarchy, money, political connections, and a command system. Falcone helped develop investigative methods that followed the money, connected families, and used testimony from mafia turncoats, known as pentiti, to expose organized crime from the inside. One of the most important pentiti was Tommaso Buscetta, a mafia boss who decided to cooperate with authorities after the Corleonesi destroyed much of his faction and killed people close to him. Buscetta's testimony helped explain the structure of Cosa Nostra and gave prosecutors the evidence they needed to bring hundreds of mafia members to trial. That trial became known as the Maxi Trial. The Maxi Trial began in Palermo in 1986 inside a specially built bunker-style courtroom. Hundreds of mafia defendants were charged. The trial was massive, historic, and dangerous. It challenged the old belief that the mafia was untouchable.
The largest trial in Italian history began today in a Palermo, Sicily courtroom. It had all the makings of a major motion picture. But as NBC's Bonnie Anderson reports now, this was real life, the real mafia.
The accused gangsters were seated in 27 cages along the far wall of the $43 million courtroom. It was the first time many of them had seen each other since their arrest. With almost 500 defendants, 400 lawyers, and 200,000 documents, the trial is expected to take more than a year. The trial grew out of an investigation begun in 1982 by Italy's top mafia fighter Carlo Alberto della Chiesa. He uncovered evidence of a new, deadlier mafia, greedy over billion-dollar drug profits. 6 months later, he was killed. The state star witness is Tommaso Buscetta, the most senior godfather ever to break the mafia code of silence, omertà. His confession led to hundreds of arrests here and in the United States. Among the charges, murder, kidnapping, and drug trafficking.
And for Riina, the Maxi Trial was a threat not only to his freedom, but to the entire myth of mafia power. Many defendants were convicted. The trial confirmed in court that Cosa Nostra existed as a real criminal organization, and it was a turning point in Italian history. Riina, who was still a fugitive, was convicted of absentia, but the legal blow became even more serious in January of 1992, when Italy's highest court upheld many of the Maxi Trial convictions. And for Riina, this was unacceptable. He believed that the mafia had been betrayed by the courts, by politicians who failed to protect them, and by anyone connected to the anti-mafia movement. So he responded in the way he knew best, with violence. Then on May 23, 1992, Judge Giovanni Falcone was traveling near Palermo with his wife Francesca Morvillo and a police escort. As their convoy drove alongside the highway near Capaci, a massive bomb exploded beneath the road. The blast was enormous. It tore open the highway and killed Falcone, his wife, and 3 police officers, Vito Schifani, Rocco DeCillo, and Antonio Montanaro. Italy was stunned. This was not a hidden mafia murder in a back alley. This was a public act of terror, and it was a message to the entire country. Cosa Nostra could kill anyone. But the killing of Falcone didn't silence the anti-mafia movement. Instead, it enraged the public. Then, only 57 days later, on July 19th, 1992, Paolo Borsellino was killed by a car bomb in Via D'Amelio in Palermo. 5 members of his police escort were also killed: Agostino Catalano, Walter Cosina, Emanuela Loi, Vincenzo Limoli, and Claudio Trana. The murders of Falcone and Borsellino became a national trauma for Italy. These were not just 2 judges. They became symbols of courage. They represented the possibility that the mafia could be confronted, exposed, and defeated. But Riina had intended to terrify the state, but instead, all it did was help awaken it. And after the bombings, the pressure to capture Riina became overwhelming. The Italian government intensified its crackdowns. The Carabinieri, the police, the prosecutors, and the anti-mafia investigators focused on finding the man who had hidden more than 20 years. And finally, on January 15th, 1993, Salvatore Totò Riina was captured in Palermo. The arrest itself became historic. After decades as one of the most wanted fugitives in the world, Riina was stopped by the Carabinieri officers while traveling in a car. He was no longer an untouchable ghost. He was an old man in handcuffs. Photographs from that day show him surrounded by the Carabinieri, looking small, ordinary, almost unimpressive. And that is the part of what makes the image so powerful. For decades, this man had been feared as a member or a monster, but when the state finally caught him, he looked like just another criminal being taken away. Riina's arrest did not immediately end mafia violence. Bombings continued in 1993, including attacks in mainland Italy. The mafia was trying to pressure the state, especially over harsh prison conditions imposed on mafia inmates. But Riina himself was now behind bars. He was placed under Italy's strict prison regimen, often associated with Article 41 BIS, designed to prevent mafia bosses from continuing to control their organizations from prison. For a boss like Riina, isolation was not just punishment. It was a way to cut the chain of command. Over the years, Riina received multiple life sentences. He was convicted for mafia crimes and murders connected to his long reign of terror. Some reports at the time of his death said he was serving 26 life sentences. Even in prison, Riina never became a symbol of repentance. He did not transform into some sort of remorseful old man seeking forgiveness. He remained defiant and unrepentant. That is important to understand because some criminals late in life try to rewrite their stories. Riina did not become a hero, a folk legend, or a misunderstood outlaw. He was a mafia boss responsible for devastating violence, and he carried that reputation to his grave.
Salvatore Totò Riina, one of the most violent and feared godfathers in the history of the Sicilian Mafia. The farmer's son from the town of Corleone took control of the Cosa Nostra in the 1970s and ruled with an iron fist for almost 2 decades. During this time, he is thought to have ordered the killings of over 150 people. Riina had been in prison from 1993 until his death, serving 26 life sentences. Most notorious amongst his crimes were the assassinations of judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, who led a crackdown on the mafia during the 1980s. After serving many years as a foot soldier for infamous mob boss Luciano Leggio, Riina took over the position at the end of the 1970s. Riina eluded the police for almost a quarter of a century, remaining on the island of Sicily, from where he controlled the mafia's business. After being ratted out by his rivals, Riina was arrested in Palermo in 1983. Riina's arrest and new anti-mafia laws that put him in isolation led to a campaign of revenge by the Cosa Nostra, with bombings carried out in Rome, Milan and Florence, killing 10 people. In 2009, Riina broke the Mafia Code of Omerta by admitting his links to the mob. Caught on wiretap in early 2017, Riina made clear his reflections on a life of crime, saying he regretted nothing.
Salvatore Riina died on November 17th, 2017, in a prison hospital in Parma, Italy. He had turned 87 the day before. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of the mafia. Cosa Nostra had been weakened by arrests, informants, surveillance, and public resistance, but it did not disappear. Organized crime adapts. When violence brings too much attention, it often changes shape. It moves into corruption or money laundering, business infiltration, and quieter forms of power. But Riina's era was different because it was so openly violent. He believed that fear could defeat the state. He believed bombs and assassinations could force Italy to back down. For a time, it seemed like no one could touch him. But in the end, his brutality helped create the backlash that damaged Cosa Nostra for generations. The murders of Falcone and Borsellino did not destroy the anti-mafia movement. They strengthened it. Today, in Italy, Falcone and Borsellino are remembered as heroes. Streets, schools, airports, and memorials carry their names. Their faces are symbols of resistance. Riina, on the other hand, is remembered as one of the darkest figures in mafia history. Salvatore Totò Riina wanted to be remembered as untouchable. Instead, history remembers him as a fugitive, a killer, and a symbol of the mafia's darkest chapter, while the men he tried to erase became the faces of courage in the fight against Cosa Nostra. All right, guys, that's another one from Tales from the Tombs NJ. Please like and subscribe. It's free. You don't have to pay for nothing, and it helps me out. Until next time, guys, take care.